Welcome to DIYEasyCrafts.com. Easy, do-it-yourself wood inlays. Now in this video we're going to show you 3 different types of wood inlays and we're going to use 3 different types or techniques to cut out the wood. We're going to do a couple of variations of the inlay material, including a brass and also a resin. And then, as I mentioned before, 3 different variations on how to cut out the wood in preparation for doing the inlays. Now the first one we're going to start by printing out a basic logo or shape that we want it cut out. I'm going to glue that just onto a piece of scrap wood. I'm just doing this on pine. And we're going to stain that pine. If you were going to do it on hardwood, you could eliminate the stain process. I went out and I bought a router bit for my Dremel grinder. This is a 1/16 diameter router bit, and I also bought Dremel's sheetrock cutting adapter, which almost converts the Dremel into a router. And that was very cheap. It's basically a piece of plastic. I got it on the internet, I think, for $8. And I'm basically just going to set the depth on that router bit to maybe 1/16 of an inch or so, and I'm just going to router out the entire design that I want inlaid. So I'm basically just cutting out the entire inlay. And I did that right through the paper. When I was done, I sanded away all of the paper. You get a better look at the cutout after the paper's gone. And this whole process didn't take very long at all. I then filled it in with some dark stain, and I wanted to stain it before I did the inlay, just so that I got stain into all of those grooves cut with that Dremel router. This way, if any of the inlay didn't fill every little spot, it wouldn't be a bright light wood showing through. Now this is a turquoise powder that I bought on the internet. A nice blue, a nice fine powder, and I'm just going to sprinkle that into all of the grooves, and then I'm going to use a flat edge. You could use a credit card or a piece of wood or a piece of cardboard. This piece of cardboard has a nice straight edge on it, and I'm going to just work that powder into all of those grooves. You can tap it a little bit. The vibration of the wood helps the powder to settle down to the base of each one of those grooves. And then you just basically, with the straight edge, you want to scrape away all of the powder that's not filling in that design. Then I'm going to use some clear CA glue, and I'm just going to drip that glue right onto the turquoise powder. That's going to seep through that turquoise and into the wood. It's going to create a nice hard finish. Once that dries, you can sand it off. And you can see that the inlay is basically done at this point. I sanded with an 80 grit, then I went with a 220, and then after I was finished sanding, I restained that piece of wood just to see how it would look on the dark, with a dark finish. Now, because this is just a test piece, I'm certainly not going to let that stain sit on the wood as long as I would on a finished piece. But you will get the idea as to what the finished piece would look like. When you wipe away all the excess stain, you end up with a beautiful light blue inlay. Again, here's the finished product. This is before the stain, and this is after the stain. Now, for the next inlay, I wanted to have sharper edges, and I wanted to be able to have some real, come to a point. And with the 1/16 diameter router bit, I didn't think I could get into those edges. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the same process. I'm going to print a design, glue it onto a piece of wood, and then I'm using a razor knife to score the entire outside shape of that design. I then moistened the paper and I sanded it lightly just to get rid of the paper, because I found I couldn't really router through that paper accurately. So now I've got the design of the logo that I want to inlay basically cut in with a razor knife. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the router again, or to the Dremel router again, with that same 1/16 diameter bit, and I'm going to cut away all of the material on the inside of each one of those razor cut lines. In the areas that I can't get to, like some of those real fine pointy areas, I'm going to then go back and I'm just going to trim it with the razor knife and kind of push that wood into the grooves cut with the grinder, or with the Dremel grinder. It's really not that complicated. We're not talking about rocket science here. It's basically just scoring the whole outline of the shape that you want and then slowly cutting away the inside with that Dremel router. After that, basically the same process. I'm going to add some stain to the wood before I do the inlay. I wanted to try a different inlay media. So on this one, I thought that a brass inlay might look really good. This is a very fine brass powder, which I also bought on the internet. I just searched for, brass powder, inlay brass powder. Same process. You're gonna spread this back and forth. You could tap it a little bit, get it deep inside each one of those grooves, and then scrape away with the flat edge as much as possible, and then add the CA glue. The CA glue will seep down in amongst that brass powder, down into the wood, and once it's dry, if you put it in the sun, it takes less than an hour to dry. It becomes nice and hard. Once it's hard to the touch, you can sand it. Again, I did the exact same 80 grit and then 220 grit sandpaper. And I thought this one came out pretty nice. The brass can almost be polished. I then applied the same stain. And again, this is still another sample piece, so I'm not going to let the stain stay on there all that long. Just really want to get an idea as to how the brass inlay looks with, a medium tone wood. And that's the finished product with the brass inlay. A little bit more detail, a little bit finer lines, a little sharper edges. For the third and the last inlay project, I did something a little bit different, and this ended up being my favorite. I used that same 1/16 diameter router bit in the Dremel tool, but instead of using that sheetrock cutting adapter, I'm just freehanding it, and I'm using the edge of that router bit rather than coming straight into the piece, straight down on the piece. That allows me to get a nice sharp edge, and I could basically just freehand and cut out the entire outside shape. Now on this one, I did not glue the paper down. What I did was I laid the paper down, I traced the outline, pressing down on the pencil, and then I removed the paper, and I could see the pressed down line on the wood, and I just retraced it with a pencil. Then I went over that entire outline with that Dremel tool, freehanding the outline. This is another Dremel tool that I'm using. It just has a little round head to the bit, and I'm just going to carve away all of the inside of that design. I've already done the whole outside, outside shape. Then I just cut away the inside. Now this is kind of cool. This is just some fiberglass resin mixed with a couple of drops of a blue modeler's paint. So it's a oil-based paint. You don't have to add that much blue. In addition to that, I added some blue sparkles, some fine blue sparkles, which I got down at Michael's Arts and Craft. You do want to fill up the void and then scrape away as much of this fiberglass resin as possible. You may have to go back and refill it a little bit after it dries, so you may have to mix 2 batches of this. You certainly don't have to mix a lot of this resin. What I liked about this is the end result. Number one, came out great, but also you didn't have to go out and buy turquoise powder or brass powder, and you ended up with a really dynamic result. Again, I sanded with 80 and then with 220 grit paper. I think using this technique I got an equal amount of detail as I did with the razor knife, but I think that the blue, especially the blue with the sparkles, really added a decent amount of contrast, and the logo kind of popped out a little bit more than the other inlays did. So this is staining. Now on this one I did not stain before I did the inlay material, and I did that for a reason, because I wanted the contrast. If there's any little bit of white showing, I thought it would add a little bit of additional contrast to this particular inlay, but you could do it either way. This is the finished product on the fiberglass resin inlay. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the videos. If you did, I ask you to give it a thumbs up or subscribe to this YouTube channel. Please check us out on the web at DIYEasyCrafts.com and check out our other how-to projects. Thank you.